Hello, dear viewer. I'm here today to explain to you why Einstein's theory of relativity is nothing compared to B.S. Skinner's theory of relativity. You know, which might sound insane. Einstein is the textbook picture definition of a smart dude, and his theory of relativity set the scientific foundation for how we understand the physical world around us and how it interacts and affects our body. But today, I'm here to talk about the mental side of that. The most important question a human can have, the most important question that can be answered. This is, of course, in my opinion as a psychologist, is how to explain and control human behavior, right? And the law of relativity, I think, is the most broad law that explains that, but at the same time, to build on top of a foundation, you need to have the foundation first. So that's why this is my first video. So the law of relativity says every future perception will be judged relative to the sum of all previous perceptions. Everything is relative to what has been perceived by an individual. So this really, in a lot of fields of psychology, people talk about the importance of early life and how that forms identity. Think of the stereotypical therapist question, you know, so what's your relationship like with your father or your mother, right? And that's real because everything that happens to you will come back to affect you in some way or another, right? So memory and consciousness is like a rolling tide. A decision or an event that happens in your life will infinitely affect the decisions you make. Now, this depends on what's perceived as good for the situation. It also depends on how much the event stands out and how recent the event is as well. And I think the most important principle of the law of relativity is the most important way to control your perception is to control your identity because let's face it, no one has a time machine. You can't go back to change your early life. But outside of changing your identity, which I have a lot to say about that in the future as well, but when we're looking at events influencing people's perception, outside of how the biological factors within us will go on to control our life decisions, the way that we're going to apply this is mostly in terms of recency, what happened in an individual's life recently. And the closer you get to the present moment, the more it's going to matter. Well, pairing it with the principle of magnitude, what is going to mean the most, what's going to stand out. So, just to throw in a couple examples of how recency and magnitude and this whole picture kind of plays out, we're going to talk about habituation and sensitization. So, habituation is basically the principle of boiling a frog. You have events that if they were if you took an event at the end of a chain and applied it at the beginning, right? If you put the frog in the boiling water immediately, it's going to freak out. But if you slowly increase the temperature, by the time you get to the end, the frog will not even notice that it's being boiled. And I think this is one of those principles that if this is you, if this isn't you, if there's someone you know that lives like this, if you look around and you see someone who is just not living a good life, they think their life is fine when it's clearly not. And I mean, then again, that's your judgment, but there are, I think, some objective truths to the way that there are healthy ways to live and there are unhealthy ways to live. And it varies from person to person, but there is still kind of universal things out there. But people can habituate themselves into really crazy, horrible life circumstances. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have sensitization. You could have someone saying their life sucks, and you look at their life and you're so confused. And this is one where if someone thinks their life sucks due to this, it's probably, just as much as habituation influenced by early life and identity, right? So, in the case of habituation, I mean, let's think about it this way. If the frog is choosing to use his consciousness to reevaluate the state of the water that he's in terms of temperature on a fairly regular basis, he's not going to find himself in a situation where the temperature ever gets to a point to where it's too much, right? And in your case, being the frog in this hypothetical scenario, your warming water could be something like your physical appearance, if we're being more superficial, um, the state of your finances, how much you're spending. It could be more literal, like physical possessions deteriorating around you, or it could be something like, and this is probably the most important one, the state of the relationships around you and how much attention you're giving them, what you're getting out of them, how you're handling them in general. So that's why we have to use our consciousness and our ability to, reevaluate to do that on things that are important to us so we don't end up in poor situations and circumstances. Anyways, back to sensitization. So, sensitization, the best way I can explain this is it's any pattern that leads to an increase in the direction of someone's consciousness, right? And this is typically caused by an insecurity or a trauma. So over time, the same event at the end of the chain will provoke a larger reaction that it would have at the beginning of the chain. And a good example of this is the expression of racism, right? So at the beginning of a chain, let's say somebody, their family has had poor experiences with people of a certain race, or they themselves in their early life have had poor experiences with people of a certain race. So that's the identity piece of it. But each interaction they have with someone of that race is going to be built off of that initial principle. And that will, in theory, if the chain isn't broken and if they continue to direct their consciousness in a certain way, will continue to build and build and build upon itself until you get somebody who potentially is upset just by seeing or thinking about the existence of someone of a certain race. So that was probably a lot of information to take in, but before I end the video, I just wanted to go back over and talk about the key points I wanted to make that I want to make sure everyone understands. So, I talked about habituation and sensitization, right? And now that you know what those concepts are, habituation is caused by not having enough consciousness to spare and can lead to you not having enough attention towards things that may or may not be important to you. And even if they are important, there might be something that's more important. And sensitization, the idea of over focusing your consciousness on a certain area, can be just as harmful because you're wasting all of this energy that could be better directed elsewhere. So I guess the main takeaway of this video is I'd like you to examine parts of your life where you may be overly sensitized or where you may be overly habituated and try to make adjustments accordingly. And also take a look at your general life circumstances and don't go too far into detail, but just broadly compare them to the world around you, right? And not even necessarily to the world around you. That might just be to ground you in a certain way, but more importantly, compare them to your identity and what you want to be. So, yeah, more or less that's it. I'm going to throw some graphs up on the screen that I didn't get to use in the video, and I'm going to hit the outro button. So, bye everyone. That's right, dear viewer. I have